go ahead and start the recording. So this is going to be a once a week. We're going to skip on holidays, but otherwise it's going to be a once a week tutorial. And we're going to be working our way through the Repertory Tutorial and Workbook. And we're going to be bringing in little cases that we can repertorize, simple things. The basics that we're going through are there to help us to either help introduce or help remind us of things that maybe we learned a while ago and we forgot, or things that we've never heard. The assumption coming into this is that there's no knowledge base required, and that everything that we talk about is going to be from the ground up, just like it was for Hahnemann. You know, nobody handed Hahnemann a book and said, here's how it works. So that's going to be a good opportunity for us to learn and to chat and to discuss. Okay. Isn't the complete updated each year? You know, it is updated, and honestly, I am very cautious about, in my repertory software, living on the bleeding edge. A lot of times updates of data are also associated with updates of software. And there are several times where being on the brand new version has been painfully not workable for me. And so I always kind of stay a few generations behind. Okay, I figure with 3,000 remedies or whatever it is that we've got in the repertory now, that I can find something with what was true last year. And I really don't push with that. Okay, so welcome to the idea of so many symptoms, because that's what's in the repertory. And as we attend these sessions and talk with each other, I'm going to encourage you to be sitting there with your book in your hand so that you can take a look. I can say, what do you think about chapter so-and-so? Can you go find such and such? And we're going to use this opportunity to develop familiarity with all the different things in there that maybe you've never seen, or maybe you knew and then you forgot. I always learn things that I forgot. So I think it'll be that way for all of us. So Hahnemann developed homeopathy from the ground up, and the repertory became a necessary tool as part of that. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the source of how it was developed. We're going to talk about a key concept of what is a diagnosis versus what is a collection of symptoms. And then we're going to talk about what happens in these experiments that are called provings, and how do they come into the repertory as a symptom. And then we'll go through next steps so that you can be ready for next week. All right. So here's Hahnemann. Hahnemann started out with an experience. He had been reading a book that he was translating that was saying, I think the reason why this medicine is good for this thing is because of its astringent properties. And Hahnemann, being Hahnemann, thought to himself, actually, there are things that are much more astringent than that, and they don't help with this complaint. So I don't think that's very likely. And he actually wrote that into his translation of the text because he was Hahnemann, and that's kind of how he saw the world. So the remedy, the substance that was being talked about in this book is a plant, cinchona, and it's also known as China. And they were talking about febrile symptoms of malaria. China is a remedy that's often used in malarial fevers. And so Hahnemann started taking a little bit of it, more and more little doses. And lo and behold, he noticed that he began to have the kind of fever and chills that someone with malaria has. So he stopped taking it, and all the symptoms went away. And he started taking it again, and the symptoms came back. And he stopped taking it, and all the symptoms went away. And he went through this one more time, and he thought, okay, There is definitely a connection between this substance and those kinds of malarial fevers. Hmm. And he began to think about that. So he was at the beginning of the idea of the connection between a substance that was curative for something and could also create those symptoms. So Hahnemann had a very helpful training. We, as within the world of homeopaths, we kind of tend to ascribe everything to his brilliance. And let's be honest, the guy was brilliant. And so we tend to think that everything, the idea about provings, the idea about only one substance at a time, the idea about whatever, we tend to ascribe this to him. And actually, sadly, that is not true. What we do know is true is that he was going to school with a very influential physician, Anton von Sturck. And von Sturck was teaching at the Vienna school. And at that school, they were very adamant. Most medical schools at that time were kind of pharmacy-based. And they would say, get a whole bunch of stuff and put it in a jar and mix it up and give it to people. And there was no clinic. There was no finding out what happened after you gave it to people. And a lot of it was based on this older Greek theory of four humors. Are you guys familiar with the old Greek humors? The melancholic and phlegmatic, and do you remember those? Yeah?
Yep.
So that's what a lot of medicine was based on at that time. But this was an era of emerging empiricism where people were kind of saying, yeah, well, if it does that, show me. Let's look at the data. And this was part of the Vienna school's training, where they wanted to see what one individual substance did at the bedside of one sick person. And they would build up their understanding about how medicines work in terms of health and illness based on that, not based on let's put a whole bunch of things in a jar and mix it up and give it to somebody and see how it goes. In fact, they were incredibly opposed to that idea because they felt that as soon as you put a whole bunch of things in the jar, you couldn't possibly tell what was acting and what was not, even though that was the way that medicine had been done for hundreds of years at that point. So, coming from that training and having had this funny experience with China, Hahnemann began to experiment. He began to wander down this little road of seeing, well, if that was curative for malarial fevers and I took it and it created that, what about other substances? What do they create? And if they create other things, can it help with those things as well? And he was familiar with writings of Paracelsus and Hippocrates that suggested that there was this linkage, and he got curious. So he began to experiment and he began to observe. And he was an incredibly exact observer. And he called these experiments with each substance provings. And he was proving what that thing would do. And he gave these substances in a way that would be totally unethical now to his kids and the family dog and himself and the neighbor. And he was pretty good at it, enrolling people into his worldview. And so then he would talk with them and he would say, what has happened to you since you took that dose? And he would make these long, long lists of symptoms in his very, very detailed way. Okay? We're all up to date with this so far? All right. And so the symptoms that were produced in these experiments were the same ones that could be relieved by that substance. That's the like cures like part of homeopathy. Homeo, same, pathos, suffering, same suffering, like cures like. So the collections of symptoms became his version of what was called at that time Materia Medica. And Materia Medica is the collection of information about a medicine, material about a medicament, if you will. And oftentimes we'll see it abbreviated in our homeopathic language and communications as MM. MM, if you see that together, usually 2 capital M's, that means Materia Medica. And each substance was referenced with a Latin name. Now, Hahnemann actually saved us all a lot of bother by making this choice. And again, this was influenced by the heritage in the Vienna school. Folk names for plants or bugs or whatever were highly variable depending on where you happened to be. And so what was lungwort in southern Germany might be called motherwort in northern France, and wigglewort in the UK, and banana peel somewhere else. There was no standardization at all. And if you're curious about this, if you've got something like Clark's Dictionary of Practical Materia Medica, which is one of my favorite Materia Medicas, and I think it's still downloadable from Google Books. Sue or Kristen, one of you guys, somebody in one of our earlier conversations had checked it out and found the link for that. So if you go look at any particular remedy in Clark's Dictionary of Practical Materia Medica, you'll see 3, 5, 10, 20 different names for it from different areas. Now, Hahnemann avoided all that confusion by saying things have a Latin name, we will use that Latin name. And Latin names at that time, and again, this is something from the Vienna school, they were connected with chemistry and botany and other medicines being used. And so Hahnemann aligned with what he had been taught. And that's why each of these substances has a Latin name, and that Latin name shows up in the Materia Medica, and it shows up in our repertories. Now, Hahnemann wrote out in great detail all of these symptoms, and he used his notes about it in order to find matches. He would remember to himself, oh yeah, there was somebody who had that funny feeling of cold water pouring out of their left ear. Which remedy was that? And he would go look until he could find which substance that was. Well, when there were only 8 remedies or 20 remedies, you can imagine that that was workable, right? You could remember like your kids' faces or something, you know? He'd lived through the provings of it. He knew those. But he was a really busy guy. He was a really productive guy. And very soon he had conducted dozens, hundreds of these experiments. And he published them all in a book called Materia Medica Pura, a pure Materia Medica. And this was, again, part of the heritage of the Vienna school. They were looking for pure substances. What does that one substance create? Not in a mix, but that one thing, so that we can know what the qualities of each substance are. And if we look at Materia Medica Pura, we see each substance listed in alphabetical order by Latin name, and he describes how the substance was prepared, and then all the symptoms are listed line by line, and sometimes they seem organized and sometimes they just seem kind of random. Oh, thank you, Kristen. Yeah, there's a link for Clark's Dictionary of Practical Materia Medica. It really is such a wonderful reference tool that, yeah, thank you. I'll be sure and put that in the notes. All right, so let's look at an example of, say, a remedy like dulcamara, which is known by the common name of bittersweet in Hahnemann's Materia Medica Pura. There we go. Are you guys able to see this?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Hahnemann's Materia Medica pura, and this is the remedy dulcamara. And if we look at the natural history of it, the Latin name Solanum dulcamara, it's called woody nightshade. It's also called bittersweet root and a bunch of other things. And he says that the juice freshly expressed from the young stalks and leaves of this shrub before its flowering time, mixed with equal parts of spirits of wine, 2 drops of the clear fluid overlying the sediment were added to 98 drops of spirits of wine with the vial shaken with 2 strokes of the arm, and in this way diluted through 29 vials, filled 2/3 with 100 drops of spirit wine. Do you see what I mean about detailed? The man was really detailed and exact in the content. All right, so what we can tell with this is that he gave somebody a 30C, right? A 30C potency. He started with the first thing, 2 drops of the clear fluid with 98 drops of the alcohol, and he went through that process through 29 vials. So he did his 2 drops to 98 drops instead of 1 to 100. And so he potentized this up to a 30C. He says it's very probable, as experiments have indeed partly proved, that this very powerful plant belongs to the antisorics. These are remedies that dealt with the miasm of psora, as the following pure effects of it seem able to show. Still, I shall try to obtain more accurate corroboration. He was always looking for more. It will moreover be found specific for some epidemic fevers and also for various acute diseases, the results of a chill. And this is one of the big notes of dulcamara, is that someone is worse after having been exposed to a chill. Its long duration of action is shown in its trials of healthy persons, and provings were always done on healthy people. So then we start looking at the remedies, or at the symptoms. Now, just between you, me, and the lamppost, I find this very hard to draw conclusions from because it's at a very, very granular level. Transient slight vertigo, at noon before eating, while walking, giddy, as if all objects remained standing before him, and as if it became black before his eyes. Okay, momentary vertigo. He's got all these things right here about vertigo. That's all lumped together. And then stupefaction and headache and sensations in the head, aching in the whole of the forehead. Now, we don't know from his notes how many different people there were in the proving, although in the actual Materia Medica pura book, it might say. And then he moves on from head pain and the specific details and areas into things happening with the ears, clear ringing of the ears. Sometimes he gives us specific time frames, like this symptom came out after 3 days, or after half an hour, or after 4 days. And sometimes he also tells us that other things happen after a particular condition, like twitching movements of the lips and the eyelids when in cold air. Okay? So I just want you to look at how many symptoms there are in Hahnemann's notes for dulcamara. Just keep going. That's a lot of stuff. Holy moly. Very much out of humor, inclined for nothing for several days. In the afternoon, a peculiar humor. He must quarrel with everyone, but he's not angry. Okay, that's on that note, we are going to leave Hahnemann's Materia Medica pura right where it is. So pretty soon, Hahnemann had to ask himself, how good is my memory? He was limited by how much he could remember. And notice that all those informations that we just looked at, all those symptoms, they're listed by remedy. But you know what? We never use them by remedy. When somebody walks into us and says, I need help, they don't say, I need dulcamara. They come in and they say, I have this symptom and this symptom and this symptom. But that's not how our Materia Medica is arranged. And soon Hahnemann was running into the limits of even his very capable memory. And so he decided he wanted to create an index, and he called it a repertory based on the term repertus, which is a verb meaning to find. So Materia Medica facts are arranged by the Latin name of the remedy, but the repertory has facts that are arranged by symptom. And Hahnemann started the first repertory in 1805. So let's look from Clark at the kind of information that might be said about a remedy. This is from the Dictionary Practical Materia Medica, Baptisia tinctoria. And this is the Latin name of the plant indigo that gives you blue in your blue jeans. And this is the symptom that comes out of the proving. Mind stupor, falls asleep while being spoken to or answering. Heavy sleep till aroused, awakes only to again fall asleep in the midst of his answer. Want of power, the mind seems weak, confused, as if drunk. So this is the kind of symptom that we might see if we went and looked in Hahnemann's Materia Medica Pura or any other Materia Medica. So what if we wanted to take that and put it into searchable sound bites? We could take each of those things that was said and make it a separate little entry that could be associated with baptisia. Mind answers, stupor, returns quickly after the answer, concentration difficult, confusion of mind as if intoxicated, dullness or sluggishness or stupefaction, deep sleep, sleepiness, falling asleep when answering. Do you see how what we see here in these particularly stated symptoms is the same as what we see here in paragraph form? Yes? Okay. So this brings the question, if we're looking for symptoms, either in the Materia Medica or in the repertory, what about diagnoses? Let's just imagine that each of us who's here was sitting with someone who had the flu. And each of us has I'm not going to curse any of us by saying that we have the flu, but we're sitting in a caring way for somebody else who has the flu. And let's say that I'm sitting in the bathroom with somebody who has a gastrointestinal flu, and they're in that awkward position of not knowing whether to sit down or lean over because things are just coming out of both ends. And let's say that Kristen is sitting by somebody who's coughing in bed who has a respiratory flu. And let's say that Marjorie is working with somebody who's got a musculoskeletal flu, and they're lying on the couch aching, and their muscles ache and their bones ache. And let's say that Sue has somebody there by her house who's got a super hot fever and is just pouring out sweat. Now, what is the relationship between the term influenza and the symptoms each person has? Do they all have the flu? It all looks like something that we would call the flu. Do they look like each other at all? No. And this is why when we look in the repertory, if someone comes in and says, I have the flu, we aren't going to go look up influenza. We're going to say, tell me about your flu. And Sue's flu that she's working with is going to be different than Kristen's flu and different than Marjorie's flu. All of those are going to have a different presentation, different symptoms. And that's why it's important for us to remember that the repertory is based on symptoms, not on diagnostic categories. And part of the reason why is because the diagnosis is usually based on what's common for that complaint. And our important homeopathic symptoms are the ones that are unique and individualizing. Yes, Marjorie says she's looking at flu with a unique expression. Exactly. We're emphasizing what is not common as we look things up in the repertory. And that's why we don't want to, there are not that many things in there. There are some, especially in the newer repertories, but especially if you're looking in Kent's repertory, not much going on there that has an actual diagnostic term. Okay. So, we've talked about the relationship from approving into the repertory and from the symptoms of the proving into statements, little sound bites that we can grab easily. We talked about how diagnostic terms aren't likely to be there. And we talked about how the repertory was built when Hahnemann got to the point where he just couldn't keep it all in his head anymore. So this is the basis that we're going to be working from. The repertory of choice for this class is Kent's repertory. It's a great size to work with because at first we're going to be working with book in the hand. And some of those later repertories are honking big ones, that big red synthesis bound one. Oh my goodness, there's rubrics in there that have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of remedies in them. So it's cruel to make somebody start with that. So Kent's is great size for learning, and also Kent has almost knife-like accuracy, scalpel-like accuracy between what's in this rubric and what's in this. You know, if he's going to associate a bunch of remedies with a particular symptom, he was incredibly discriminating. So we're going to be working with that repertory. And those of you who have other repertories that you want to use, you're welcome to do that. But please avoid the ones that have completely different structure, like Benninghausen's repertory has a different structure. Murphy's alphabetical repertory, they have a different structure. If you've got one of those repertories, it's going to be very hard for you to follow along with what we're doing. And then download the Repertory Tutorial and Workbook. I'll have that on a link with the class session from this time, and I'll send it out to the people who had registered for this class so that you can go ahead and download the text as an ebook, and we'll be working our way through it. And then just put Mondays on your calendar at this time of day. Now, there's going to be a few Mondays where we won't meet. Memorial Day weekend, Labor Day weekend, things where it's a holiday, you know, Columbus Day or whatever, Veterans Day, but you'll see those coming up. But in general, we'll be meeting each week. We'll have half an hour here, time to make an assignment, review an assignment, answer questions, and discuss cases. All right, so get ready to learn and to have fun. The repertory is one of my favorite parts of Materia Medica, or of homeopathy, and it's truly unique. Guys, this is something that we learn in a way that isn't really available in other therapeutic models. And so we have an amazing opportunity to see Materia Medica both from the ball of wax of here's everything about that substance, and also kind of inside out, here's everything about this symptom. And that's what we're going to be developing good skills with. Okay, any questions? Thanks, Sue. Yeah, Kent says that she likes using Kent, or Sue says she likes using Kent's repertory. I still use Kent's repertory. I use a lot of them. I use the complete and Kent's, and sometimes Benninghausen's. But, you know, you really have to, Benninghausen is a separate thing when you're trying to get your head around that. All right. Any last comments or questions? All right. So I will plan to see you guys next week. Between now and then, if you want to read the first chapter in the Repertory Workbook that talks about the history of the repertory and how it was developed and the beginning of structure, that's what we're going to be going over next time. All right. I look forward to talking with you then, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.